Welcome to Pretty Lies and Alibis. Let's seek the truth and travel the long road to justice together. What you know, Alibis, welcome to this very late episode of Pretty Lies and Alibis on this Friday night, September 29th. I'm Gigi. Good to have you here. I wanted to hop on and do a quick episode about what we know so far about the arrest today in the murder of Tupac. But before we get started, we're going to do our music fact of the day, which is something I didn't know. It's not really a music fact, but it's about Tupac, so it falls under that category. But Tupac auditioned for the role of Bubba in Forrest Gump, as well as Mace in Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace. Tupac was a great actor. He was a great rapper, so talented, and he was only 25 years old when he was murdered. This was one of those days where I've kept up with the stories since it happened back in 1996. Tupac was really at the peak of his fame when I was in high school. He was killed my freshman year of college. And over the years, I have kept up with this story. I've watched all the documentaries, read all the files that are out there online. And this was just a random day where I'm sitting here working and boom, all of a sudden I get a news alert. There's been an arrest in the murder of Tupac. Didn't see that coming. Honestly, never thought this case would see any kind of charges filed, but here we are, and better late than never. Let's go through the press conference that was given today after the announcement of the murder charges. Kevin McMahill, who is the sheriff of the Las Vegas Metro Police Department, gave a news conference today to update on the arrest of 60-year-old Duane Keffe D. Davis for murder in the shooting death of Tupac 27 years ago, back in 1996. Keffe D was arrested this morning, and the investigation into Tupac's murder started on the day he was murdered, September 7th, 1996. He said it's taken decades of hard work to get here. He said Mr. Davis's own words reinvigorated their case back in 2018. Jason Jonasson from Homicide got up to the podium and walked through a timeline talking about the gang connections and the feud between these two gangs. Keffe D was the leader and the shot caller of this rival gang. Both gangs operated out of Compton. September 7th, 1996, Tupac and Suge Knight went to Las Vegas for a Mike Tyson fight at the MGM Grand Hotel. Duane and his nephew, whose name was Orlando Anderson, were in attendance as well. After the boxing match, members of Tupac's group spotted Orlando near an elevator inside the MGM Grand Hotel. They began to kick and punch him, and they, at the press conference, show surveillance of Tupac and Suge Knight punching and kicking Orlando Anderson. Hotel security intervenes and they all leave the area of the fight. This incident, meaning the punching and the kicking, led to the retaliatory shooting of Tupac. After the fight, Tupac and Suge left to go to an after party at a local nightclub. At the same time, word started spreading to the rival gang about the fight that happened in the hotel. Keffe D devised a plan to get a firearm and retaliate against Tupac for what happened to his nephew. After obtaining the firearm, he got into a white Cadillac with 3 other men, including his nephew, Orlando Anderson, who was the one that was beaten up. Based on their investigation, it had Duane in the front and Orlando in the back. He gave the gun to the rear occupants. And just to note, out of the 4 occupants in that white Mercedes, Keffe D is the only one still alive. His nephew was murdered just a few years after Tupac in 1998. The group was driving west on East Flamingo Road and located the BMW with Suge driving and Tupac in that passenger seat. As they turned around, they pulled up to the passenger side of the BMW and they opened fire, killing Tupac. The white Cadillac fled the area south on Quoval, and as officers arrived on scene, Tupac was transported to the hospital. As we know, he died 6 days later on September 13th of 1996. They knew they were working a gang investigation where victims, witnesses, and suspects were all from Southern California and not Las Vegas, where the murder occurred. The first few months of the investigation, they knew most of what we just went through here, but they never were able to get enough evidence to actually charge anybody. As time went on, the case was reviewed many times by different investigators, and it wasn't until 2018 that more information came to light about Tupac's murder. Specifically, Keffe D's own admission to his involvement in the homicide that he provided to various media outlets was what lit the fuse that led us to where we are today. They thought this could be their last time to take a run at the case and pursue criminal charges. The case was assigned to Cliff Mogg. Over the last 5 years, they worked hand in hand with the Clark County DA's office and followed a systematic investigative plan over the last 5 years. They've conducted numerous interviews and have validated numerous facts consistent with the crime scene on the night of the murder, but they also validated and were consistent with the sequence of events that happened that night. A search warrant was executed at Keffe D's residence in Henderson, Nevada. This was back in July. Following the execution of the search warrant, the case was presented to a grand jury, which led to Keffe D being indicted for murder and his arrest today. Steve Wolfson, who is the Clark County District Attorney, got up to speak. He said, "It's often been said that justice delayed is justice denied. We hear that often when talking about our legal system, but not in this case. Today, justice will be served in Tupac's murder." A grand jury has indicted Duane Keith Davis for one count of open murder with use of a deadly weapon with a gang enhancement. He will appear in court in the next few days for a hearing to determine his custody status and to set a jury trial date. The grand jury has been receiving evidence for months and determined there's sufficient evidence for this indictment. He says his top prosecutors will prosecute this case. He goes on to say that Tupac was a music legend and people wanted justice. He said, "Today we're taking that step." He said Tupac was quoted as saying, "Death is not the greatest loss in life. The greatest loss is what dies inside while still alive. Never surrender." He said, "We never surrendered." He holds up the indictment and says he's proud to hold this up after waiting almost 3 decades. Sheriff Kevin McMahill was back up to take questions. He reminded the media this is only the beginning of the process and they're invested in a successful prosecution, so they opened the floor to questions. One question: "Have you been in touch with Tupac's family today and what did they tell you?" He said the family has reached out to the DA's office. They are welcoming this news. They are pleased with the news and they are aware of the indictment. He doesn't think they'll be at the arraignment since it's a very short hearing, but he said he knows they will be involved in this whole process. Another question: "What did he say that got your interest back in the case?" Sheriff said there's lots that will come out at trial. He provides his own statements that are consistent with evidence at the scene. Another question: "Anything from the warrant in July that you found that was new?" The sheriff said, "We found information that verified information from their investigation." And he said he would leave it at that right now. Another question: "Is anyone else being looked at?" He said the only living suspect is Duane Davis. All 3 other suspects are deceased. The DA gives the bank robbery example of how being the getaway driver during a bank robbery still means you can be charged for that bank robbery, even though you didn't rob the bank personally. Another question: "Do you think he was the only one behind the plan to kill Tupac?" The answer: he was the shot caller for this group who committed the crime, and he also orchestrated the crime. He obtained the gun from a close associate. Who that was, they say, will come out at trial. While executing the search warrant on Keffe D's residence in July of this year, they saw items concerning the murder of Tupac. Investigators collected multiple computers, a cell phone, a hard drive, marijuana, a Vibe magazine about Tupac, documentary documents, several .40 caliber bullets, a copy of Keffe D's tell-all memoir, which is titled Compton Street Legend, and 2 tubs of photographs. Now, he actually confessed to the murder in 2009 to investigators, but that was part of a proffer agreement, and that precludes any of the statements being used against him. He was not charged, even though he admitted his role in it. Greg Kading investigated Tupac's murder in LA and later wrote a memoir about the investigation. He told CNN's Jake Tapper today, "We knew about Davis all the way back from his initial confession to law enforcement. We sat him down back in 2009, and he confessed to his role in the murder along with other co-conspirators. He had a proffer agreement, so we couldn't utilize that information that he was providing against him. But then he began to go out and publicly boast about his involvement in the murder, and that led to law enforcement in Las Vegas taking another look at his claims, and ultimately, he's talked himself right into jail." A proffer is where the defendant essentially incriminates his or herself by openly talking about their role in a crime and their knowledge of the crime committed. Essentially, it's to assist in an investigation and being forthcoming with that. If you have a proffer, they can't use your statements against you. Even with that confession, they had to still build their case and find evidence of his involvement. He also appeared on a Netflix documentary about the murder and, as we know, wrote the memoir. He said he was one of 2 living witnesses of the murder. Suge Knight is the other living witness. Suge is in prison for an unrelated case where he ran over a man named Terry Carter, which killed him. He got 28 years for that back in 2018. He is expected to serve at least 20 years of that sentence. I mean, it's crazy, but Tupac's career professionally was only 5 years long. You think about that. He had 21 Hot 100s on the Billboard charts, including Dear Mama and Old School back in 1995, and How Do You Want It, California Love in 1996, which spent 2 weeks at #1 on the Billboard Hot 100. So that's kind of all that's out there right now. Not sure what else is going to come out over the coming weeks and months, but gonna follow this one closely. A lot of us who went to high school in the 90s are huge Tupac fans. This was maybe the first celebrity death that kind of rocked me a bit. Just a really surreal day in following this case for 27 years. And then, boom, all of a sudden we have an arrest. So let's see how things go in the next few months or however long it takes for this to get to trial. Boy, would I love to sit in that one. All right, guys, we will see you tomorrow. We're going to do a missing persons episode. And then I'm taking Sunday off. But in the meantime, hope you have a good rest of your night. We'll see you soon.